Hey folks, today's episode is appropriately sponsored by the National Pork Board to celebrate their Hams Across America campaign, which is all about paying it forward with pork all throughout the holiday season, which is exactly what I'm going to do with today's decadent holiday roast, an all-belly, herb-stuffed, crisp-skinned porchetta. Let's get down to basics. Alright, so as you might imagine, the first thing we're going to need is a big old piece of pork belly. Rule of thumb here is about half a pound per person. And then because we're going to roll this into a roulade, we need to get rid of some of the excess skin. Because skin inside the roll is not going to get crispy, it's just going to be kind of gummy and gross. So as you can see, I'm rolling up the belly and scoring the skin where it starts going inside the roll. Then using that as a guide for where to remove the excess skin. This way all the skin on the belly will be exposed directly to the warm, loving heat of the oven. Just a quick test roll to make sure that this worked, and it did. So now it's time to start stuffing this thing with all the herbs and spices that make it a porchetta. First thing we're going to do is deeply score the meat on the inside of the belly, each cut maybe 2 inches apart, going about 1 inch deep, and in both directions for a cross-hatch pattern. This is going to allow all of our seasonings to penetrate deep into the meat and leave no bite bland or boring. Then I'm just trimming off some of the edges here to make the belly into a perfect rectangle so we have a nice even roulade, and then it's time to start spicing things up. I'm starting with a whole bunch of freshly grated nutmeg, maybe about 1/4 of a nutmeg nut, and then next up a whole bunch of orange zest. You might notice that I'm not using any measurements here, and that's because it's going to depend entirely upon the size of your pork belly. Next up, some fresh herbs. I've got a few handfuls of finely chopped sage here, also a few sprigs worth of finely chopped rosemary, and you can kind of mix and match all these herbs and flavors as you see fit, but when it comes to this much fat and belly, I say the more the merrier, to wit, a fervent festoonment of fresh fennel fronds, or you could use fennel seeds if you can't find the fresh stuff. Then I saw this on Maddie Matheson's porchetta episode, and I thought it was a great idea, some freshly toasted pine nuts. Just gotta make sure to press these into all the crevices so they don't roll out. And lastly but not leastly, a very generous sprinkling of kosher salt and a very generous grinding of freshly ground black pepper. Remember, this is a lot of pork and a lot of richness, so it's pretty hard to overdo it. I also like a little sprinkling of chili flakes, and the final and maybe most essential ingredient that I almost forgot, about a dozen cloves of crushed garlic. Then we're just going to spread everything around and pat everything out to make sure that it's evenly distributed and pressed down into the crevices, and then at long last it's time to roll up. We want to roll this as tight as we can so it cooks evenly and so there are no gaps when we serve it. Next up, the absolutely essential step to ensuring crispy skin, scoring the absolute hell out of it. You want to make lots and lots of lateral cuts, just deep enough that they go through the skin, but not so deep that they go too far into the fat, and just do this all over the surface of the porchetta. This is going to help the fat render out and turn the skin light and crisp instead of chewy and hard as glass. Then we're tying the whole thing up tightly at 2 or 3 inch intervals. Then we are making a rack set and a rim baking sheet appear out of nowhere, placing the porchetta on top and then refrigerating uncovered overnight in the fridge. This is going to help dry out the skin so we end up with a crispier final product. Then we are preheating our oven to a very low temperature, about 250 degrees, lining our baking sheet with foil for easier cleanup, setting the rack back inside without pinching our inserting a temperature probe as deep as we can into the thickest part of the roast, and then roasting slow and low for anywhere from 3 to 8 hours depending on the size of your belly until we reach an internal temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And there might be a lot of fat in the baking sheet, so for safety's sake, break out your barbecue gloves and just pull the thing out by hand. As you can see, the scoring on the outside of the roast has opened up a little bit, allowing the fat to render out. But if we now crank our oven up to 500 degrees Fahrenheit and blast this guy for about 20 minutes, keeping a close eye on it to make sure that it's not burning, we're going to end up with this juicy, impossibly crispy mahogany beauty. We're going to let it rest for at least half an hour, and then it's time to carve. Use that audio. That's right, you are, Andy. And now a moment of silence as we observe the cross-section of our porchetta. Nice. Oh boy, I could listen to that all day. And for serving hot, that's pretty much it. You could whip up some Italian Salsa Verde and serve with potatoes or green vegetables, but this roast is an event, a monumental display of richness and flavor. But much like Thanksgiving or pizza, porchetta has just as much, if not more, potential as leftovers. I've got this big old hunk of it that I'm going to use to make porchetta sandwiches. I'm just going to slice it as thinly as I can, and you'll be delighted to find out that the skin is still crisp even after spending the night in the fridge. And something the sandwich really needs is Italian Salsa Verde, which again you could also serve while the roast is hot. This is a very simple uncooked sauce. We're starting with about a cup of packed fresh parsley, the juice and zest of 1 lemon, maybe zest before you juice, a couple tablespoons of capers drained of their brine, a nice splash of white wine vinegar for a little bit more acidity, a couple finely minced anchovy fillets for a little bit more of that old school Italian richness. These won't make it taste fishy, I promise. 2 or 3 cloves of fresh garlic, roughly chopped. You could also press them instead of chop them if you want a stronger garlic flavor. Maybe half a cup of high quality olive oil, the kind of stuff that you'd want to dip your bread in. A generous pinch of chili flakes if you want a little bit of heat. And of course, kosher salt and freshly ground pepper. Start light with these because we're going to process and then you can taste for seasoning and adjust as necessary. Pulse a few times just to get everybody nice and chopped up, but we don't want to puree it. We still want it nice and kind of chunky, and like I said, taste for seasoning, adjust as necessary, and we've got a nice, fresh, zesty, acidic sauce to cut through all the richness of our porchetta, which we are going to stack tall and proud on a piece of focaccia, or the robust bread of your choice, top with our salsa verde spread evenly, and we're also going to add a couple big handfuls of arugula, which is going to bring a very welcome peppery bite to our sandwich, which we are now going to secure with skewers and chop in half for the cross-section of your Boxing Day dreams. The pork belly is incredibly rich. It's like half fat, so I'm going to divide this into 4 pieces, serve up on a plate cut side out to show off all those pretty layers, and grab myself a corner for analysis. And this is probably my favorite way to enjoy porchetta. You've got nice tender slabs of pork dappled with crispy, crunchy bits of pork skin, a zingy salsa verde, and a spicy pile of arugula. It's so good I can't just keep it all to myself and Sawyer and Jess. And here's where the National Pork Board comes in, who are encouraging me to pay it forward with pork. And I've mentioned it before, I love Pinot's Prime Meats. It's where I got this pork belly. They always take really good care of me, so I thought I'd make them this gigantic porchetta sandwich, this time with the skin cracklings as a layer in the center. And I realized that this was not the most practical sandwich, so I tried to divide it into individual pieces, and I headed over to Pinot's to surprise them for lunch. And as I mentioned, this episode is sponsored by the National Pork Board and their Hams Across America campaign. I think it's a great way to pay it forward to somebody who might need or deserve something special this holiday season. Last year, this program saw over 500,000 pounds of pork donated across America, which equates to 2.2 million servings of pork. The National Pork Board represents America's pig farmers who are committed to giving back to their communities throughout the entire calendar year, but especially at holiday time. So however you guys decide to pay it forward, I hope you join Hams Across America and help spread a little seasonal cheer. Happy holidays to you and yours, and I will see you guys next year.